It's time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with Florence Villeneuve.
Hi, Jeannie.
Hi, Flo. Now, this week we're going to take a look at driving. And for many people abroad or who come to visit us here in France, the French have a reputation of being pretty reckless drivers. How true is that stereotype?
Well, Jeannie, like most stereotypes, there's a part of the truth in that stereotype, because the truth is there certainly are a lot of daily traffic violations here in France, whether it's, not stopping at the traffic light, overtaking on the wrong side, drunk driving, unfortunately, but also smaller things like talking on the phone behind the wheel, which is still a traffic offense here. And what's interesting is, and what's paradoxical, is that French people know that they're wrong when they're doing this. In fact, there's a yearly study that's carried out by insurance companies, and French people admit to the fact that they do break the traffic laws. Now, some might say this is a very French thing, to agree on the fact that there are rules in principle, but then to break them when it comes to yourself, and also to break them when no one's watching.
We let ourselves off the hook sometimes, but it depends on the situation.
Talking on the phone behind the wheel, speeding. If we're not caught, it doesn't count.
There are two types of French people, those who give themselves a free pass and those who are more disciplined.
Now, fortunately, despite that aggressive driving, that disobeying of the rules, the number of deaths on French roads has actually dropped in recent years.
That's right, because up until the 1970s, French roads were amongst the most dangerous in Western Europe, and successive governments here in France tackled the problem with all sorts of various measures, for instance, making seatbelts and helmets obligatory, setting alcohol limits, and of course reducing speed limits. And in fact, there was the most recent speed cut happened on the 1st of July 2018. The speed limit on country roads was reduced from 90 kilometers an hour, so that's almost 56 miles per hour, to 80 kilometers an hour. Now, this concerns France's so-called secondary roads, 400,000 kilometers of mostly rural roads. So these are two-lane roads without a divider. Now, this is a 10 kilometer an hour drop, but it's a major change, and as you can imagine, it actually sparked a lot of rage from French drivers. Some people say, look, this is yet another infringement on our freedom. Of course, French people don't like being told what to do. Some other people, though, really did welcome the measure because they say people just drive too fast. Take a listen.
It's going to be hard to change. We're so used to going at 90. It's a habit.
I'm sorry, but 80 kilometers per hour is too slow. When you're on a small road and there's nobody, you don't get anywhere.
People who don't pay attention forget to put their turn signal on. All that is what causes accidents and deaths on the road. Speed is one factor, but it's not the factor.
It's good to set limits. People drive too fast.
It's best to slow down and take advantage of the scenery. Look, it's beautiful. If you drive fast, you miss all of this.
And by reducing these speed limits, France has now become one of Europe's most restrictive countries in terms of speed. And if you're driving here in France, you're going to want to keep in mind some new rules.
Let's take a look at the new speed limits. This is, of course, in dry weather, but if you're driving in an urban area, it's 50 kilometers an hour on rural roads, 80 kilometers an hour unless it's a 3-lane road or there's a divider. And on highways, you can see 130 kilometers an hour. That goes down to 110 kilometers an hour if it's raining.
When you talk about driving in France, of course, you have to talk about driving licenses. And here in France, you have to be a minimum of 18 years old to get your driver's license. And it is notoriously hard to get.
It certainly is, Jeannie. And this here is the holy grail at the end of that rough road to get your driver's license. Of the 1.5 million people who try and get their license every year, half fail. So it's not only difficult, it's also incredibly time-consuming and expensive. It'll cost you about 1,000 euros to get your driver's license in France, which makes it one of the most expensive licenses in Europe. Now, to get this license, you have to drive 20 hours with a certified driving school, and then you have to pass a 2-stage exam. The theory test, you can see them taking it here. This is the Examen du Code de la Route. 40 questions, you can only make 5 mistakes, and then you have to pass an actual driving test. Now, there have been reforms recently to try and make this whole process cheaper and and quicker, essentially. But fewer and fewer young people are actually passing their driving exam. And this is a trend that's existed in Paris for years. And in fact, it's really interesting because if you ask a lot of Parisians, they just don't have a driving license because it's a real hassle to have a car. And public transport is pretty good.
And it is so hard to get your driver's French license. I did get one, though. Once you have it, what's so interesting, you have it for life, unless, of course, you commit a major traffic offense.
And that means that my 95-year-old great-aunt is still on the road in France. Now, traditionally, the license was this pink slip of paper that it's a kind of a weird format. It doesn't really fit into any wallet I've ever had. But since 2013, the format has changed, and it's going to become a more convenient credit card-sized card. And people, it'll look like this. And essentially, if you're French and you have one of these, I have until 2033 to update it. Now, when you get your license, you have to go through a 3-year probation, if you will. It's kind of a trial period where you have to drive at a reduced speed and you have to show a symbol on the back of your card. And this is our symbol du jour, our lettre du jour, our letter of the day. It's the letter A, and you can see it's a red A in a white circle. You might have seen these on French cards. This means that this is someone who has recently gotten their license. Apprenti, apprentice. So when you have one of these, it means you have to drive at a reduced speed, and you'll also only get 6 points on your license instead of 12. Most people have 12. This is the standard for a French license, and it's a particularity of the French license. You have 12 points that can get removed according to various traffic violations, but you can get them back with time, or if you go through a special course that shows that you're a good driver. Now, another particularity of French driving, if you're driving in France, is la priorité à droite. Essentially, anyone who's coming on your right at an intersection, unless it's indicated otherwise, they have the priority. So with that in mind, buckle up, drive safely, and enjoy the road.
Thank you so much, Florence Villeminot, for that look at driving here in France. Don't forget, if you have any other questions for Flo about anything to do with France or the French, you can send her a tweet at Flo Villeminot.